I had been a professional actor for many years at the Oregon Shakespeare Festival. I went to law school at 40, so I was a non-traditional law student. And yes, when I was at 2L, I got someone out, and I figured, you know what, with all the debt I'm going into, getting someone out of prison, that's the prize, right? That makes it all worth it, you know. And believe it or not, I've been lucky enough now over the past 10 years to have been able to help dozens of people come out. And in fact, and just today, I'm working with a client who was just released after having been given a 30-year to life sentence. She was homeless and was using crack, and was with another homeless woman using crack. In the morning, they used her crack all night long. In the morning, they got into a fight. There were some clothes thrown. She hit the woman with the butt of a knife on the head and got a 30-year to life sentence. She was just released yesterday through a new program that CDCR is doing called 1170D1, which is a meritorious conduct recommendation. It's when CDCR identifies certain inmates in the California state prison population that have done made such extreme efforts of rehabilitation, have gone above and beyond, that their continued incarceration is no longer in the interest of justice. And so CDCR has found to date about 45 individuals out of a prison population of about 125,000 that meet these criteria, and they will do a full review of an inmate's entire prison file, look at everything they've done in prison. It starts with like maybe their correctional counselor, so the person they see every day, goes then to that counselor supervisor, then goes to the warden, then goes to CDCR headquarters, where they do a full review of this person's history, criminal history, contact victims, et cetera. And then ultimately the secretary of CDCR will sign this letter saying, this person has done such an amazing job. Dear judge, you should look at this person's sentence again and reconsider. So it's a little flustered coming in because this person just came out, and I'm trying to get her into a reentry program, which is not always easy because you're dealing with the Department of Parole, Division of Adult Parole Operations. They don't always like to transfer supervision from one county to another, so it becomes a whole thing. So anyway, that's a day in the life, right? And you know, I will tell you that this particular client had suffered years of horrendous abuse, had mental health issues starting as a child, was gang raped as a child, was pretty much anything that could happen to you happened to her as a young girl. And it is not at all surprising that she then had a long history with interacting with criminal justice, never got the mental health treatment that she needed, was instead put in foster homes. She was actually kicked out of youth authority because she had, I think, ulcerative colitis, so they couldn't handle her medical issue. So they kicked her out of CYA and put her into a foster home, which was certainly by no means better equipped to manage a foster child with ulcerative colitis. She was basically failed by the system at every single turn. And yet she's achieved this incredible thing, I think is an incredible testament to the powers of resilience and rehabilitation and getting the right person to the right place with the right services. That can make all the difference and can ultimately be a lot cheaper than the $70,000 a year it costs to keep someone incarcerated in California State Prison, particularly someone who's getting older and who has medical needs. So that was a little anecdote. Yeah, sorry about that. Go ahead, Brett.
What was the title of the program?
It's called, it's actually in the Penal Code section 1170, paren D, paren 1, paren. So 1170, I'll just write it down.
Would it bother anyone if I turned off one string lights here?
So this is a little bit more than good behavior. This is something over and above.
Precisely, Cortez, precisely, over and above. You've really got to stand out, and it's a very long process. It's a very long process for review. So I was reading your syllabus, and it's like a who's who of all of the amazing people that I rely on in my work when I am looking for advice and information. Who can help me with this aspect? Who can help me with that aspect? Who knows a lot about this particular area of law? Who knows a lot about this particular area of reentry? So you are really lucky. Your instructor has really put together, your instructors have really put together an amazing program. And it's really kind of the cream of the crop here, doing all of this work here in the Bay Area and beyond. I want to talk a little bit about sort of what we as a Three Strikes Project do. We started basically doing what are called habeas corpus petitions for individuals that were serving life sentences for non-serious, non-violent crimes. So this started back in 2005. In California, it had one of the harshest three strikes laws that exists in the nation. It meant that if you had 2 prior strikes and you went out and committed any felony, you could be sentenced to life in prison. Now, at that time, the law has changed since we kind of helped get it changed, but at that time, any felony could be something as small as simple drug possession. So we had people serving life. I have someone who's serving a life sentence for attempting to be an accessory to a car theft. Mentally ill, and I'll talk a little bit more about him later, probably duped into this. And this was in 1996. The courts were just like, put him away, lock him up forever. At the time we started our work, there were between 3,000 and 4,000 people who were serving life sentences in California State Prison for things like one of our clients who stole a pair of socks. One of our clients was serving a life sentence because he worked at a Mervyn store and he and another employee colluded so that he could return a pair of jeans and get a bigger than entitled employee discount on the return. I mean, it was just some of the most ridiculous things. Somebody for attempting to sell a small amount of crack, this person just basically sold, powder that wasn't crack, and this person was serving a life sentence. As you can imagine, this had a really, really big impact on people who were socioculturally on the lower rungs of the ladder. People who were just doing whatever they could to get by, people who were shoplifting, people who were using or trying to get enough drugs to use for personal use. We're not talking about drug kingpins here. We're not talking about criminal masterminds. We're talking about people who generally have been failed by the system their entire life. We're talking about people, I'm sure you talked about this with dual diagnosis, people who were maybe self-medicating a mental health issue by using drugs, or people who became addicted to drugs as a result of a mental illness or some other disadvantage through their childhood. So there were thousands of people in California prisons who were serving these sentences. And my boss, the director of the project, was working in the Ninth Circuit and would see just petition after petition from all these people coming across the judge's desk. And it was just like, denied, 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 you're in prison forever. That's just what it's going to be. So as a result of the work that we did, sort of trying to expose this kind of injustice, we were able to get the law changed in 2012. As a result of the work, though, we began to notice that a lot of our clients had really severe mental health needs. They needed mental health treatment. One of our one of our levy clients. I love this guy, but he was serving, I think, 100 years to life because he was running up the sidewalk, grabbed a person's purse, and then ran and then dropped the purse under a car. So that's a violent felony because it's a robbery. So when you take something from somebody's immediate personal sphere by force or fear or threat of force or fear, that in California is a violent crime. So he was serving, I think he did that, and there was one other thing he did, so he ended up getting 2 25 to life sentences. He was so mentally ill that the judge on his own said, can we please get a mental health practitioner in here to determine if this person is competent. Of course, when you do that, you get some mental health professionals that will say, oh, yes, he's competent, and one mental health professional from the other side that says, oh, no, he's not competent. So there's always this sort of battle of the experts. Ultimately, who loses? Usually our clients. So this individual begged the judge to sentence him to the max, and his attorney basically was like, okay, fine, if that's what you want, I'm not going to fight it. So he was serving 100 years to life in prison for that. But the reason I bring him up is that this was a clear issue of a mental health need, and we were ultimately able to get it righted through a process I'll tell you about in one of these other slides, but he was not uncommon. The only thing uncommon about him was that he happened to be in a county that had resources available, but just for whatever reason didn't choose to use them for this particular guy. One of the reasons, as we discovered through our work, that there are so many individuals with mental health problems in our prisons is a direct result of a deinstitutionalization process that began in the 70s. Have you guys talked about that at all? So you talked about how there were
We're our first mental health focus.
Oh, okay.
We talked all about mass incarceration, but not like Ronald Reagan.
Oh,
Yes,
oh,
please.
okay, all right then.
And it was in our reading. It was in their reading.
Okay, so how do I work this?
Oh, is it working?
I don't know. I just don't know. I'm
Because I
just not.
missed that.
Oh wait, here's the mouse there.
Oh,
How about I do that?
And then you
For
can
all of you who were born before 1980, Ronald Reagan was one of our presidents.
Thank you, Cortez. Yes. I'm pretty sure everyone knows who Ronald is. But so in sort of the early 70s, late 60s, early 70s, there was a big movement. A lot of this was a result of, I don't know, if you have seen One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest with Jack Nicholson, raise your hand, because you're pretty young. Okay, so this movie is kind of about somebody who is in a mental hospital for the criminally whatever, and it sort of shone a spotlight on potential opportunities for abuse, right, that happen in that environment. And there was a huge push toward getting people out of these state hospitals and getting them into the community where they could actually have access to their family, have access to resources, be treated in their neighborhoods, be treated near the people that had the power to sort of provide them with support, emotional support, spiritual support, family support, et cetera, which is a great idea. And I think most of us would advocate for that and say that that's great. Let's put those that need mental health care, that need that support, in their communities with the people that care for them. Well, they did part of that, right? They closed down all the state hospitals in California, with the exception of just one or two. The problem is that they didn't provide any funding for community mental health treatment. So they were supposed to save all this money by closing these state hospitals, and then they were supposed to send those savings to the communities so that they could reinforce their community health treatment plans, but they never did that. So suddenly we have a bunch of people that are in the community that have mental health issues that aren't getting any kind of treatment. And you'll see what happens is that we begin to just put them in prison. Because what happens when you have someone with untreated mental illness and without any sort of access to care, with families that can't provide everything for them, they end up acting out and they end up being repeat offenders. People get tired of them and they just get sent to prison. And that's what happened. And personal experience, I can tell you that certainly happened. And you'll see on this graph, our prison population began to rise, not just because of mental illness, but for a variety of reasons. And within that population, there were a large number of people who really needed mental health treatment and were not getting it. So what's interesting is that, let's see, did you have someone talk about Coleman?
Well, Sarah
And
Norman
Plata.
is here, but she focused on Plata more.
Okay. So Coleman, Plata are kind of sister cases, right? And what happened was those that were in prison and had mental health issues, they recognized that these individuals were not getting the care that they needed. It was deplorable. They found that, people with mental health needs were getting no attention, no care. It was really, really bad. So there was a class action in Coleman v. Wilson, and the class was all inmates with serious mental disorders who are now or will in the future be confined within the California Department of Corrections. So it was basically a class action that was brought on behalf of anybody that had been diagnosed with or had been designated as somebody who needed mental health care that was in prison. This class sued for failure to provide adequate care. And so they were really the start. I mean, they were like before Plata, like they were the ones that were like, we are not getting the care we need. That then led into an issue about overcrowding. Well, the prisons are too overcrowded to provide this care. So because of this overcrowding, no one's getting the care they need. And in 2009, they found that there were unconstitutional conditions for mentally and physically ill inmates, and they ordered a reduction of the prison population, which I think is interesting. I'm sure Sarah talked about the fact that, oh, well, it just 137.5% of capacity, right? That's some great goal. So no, we're not trying to get to 100% of capacity, just 137.5. Like that's a reasonable number. So this litigation has been ongoing since the 90s for this particular class. What I'll talk about a little bit more is, sadly, the people that have benefited the most from this overcrowding reduction, from this reduction in the prison population, is pretty much everyone except those with mental health issues. They have been left behind by almost every piece of litigation, every piece of sentencing, reformation, every initiative that has been targeted to reducing the prison population has pretty much not really helped those with mental health issues. So I talked a little bit about the fact that the mentally ill are overrepresented in our prison population. So if you look at this, this is really just to kind of give you a sense of the difference, right? So mania disorder symptoms, you'll see 43.2% of individuals in state prisons experience these symptoms, whereas it's 1.8% in the community. Major depressive disorder, I mean, I'd be depressed if I were in prison for life, but seriously, you know, these people have real problems with depression, with a variety of diagnosed mental illnesses. 23.5% in prison, 7.9% in the community, and psychotic disorder symptoms, 15.4% in prison and 3.1% in the community. So you'll see that there's a real overrepresentation of individuals with mental health services needs in prison compared to the community. And then in California, those with mental disorders, these are sort of the monikers that CDCR uses. In 2017, it was about 45%. That has been going down by about 1% each year since 2016. It's been going down about 1% each year, but you can see it's still a huge proportion of the inmate population in California state prisons. And these are inmates who at any time were diagnosed with a mental disorder. We'll talk a little bit about what those categories are in prison in a second, but you can go in and out of having a diagnosis of a mental health disorder. So somebody may be considered an acute mental health problem, you know, in 2010, and then 3 years later, they're fine. Even if they haven't been given really any services or given any medication, because it's a very, the designation system and the mental health diagnoses sort of go up and down and up and down and up and down, and there isn't really any sort of consistent level of care throughout the prisons. Every prison is basically its own little island, and every prison does things sort of its own way. And even though there are standards that are supposed to be consistent throughout all of them, it just never works that way. At least it is not for my clients. Yeah.
Is the California Correctional Healthcare Services the sort of receivership over the mental health providers the way it is over the medical service providers?
Yes, it oversees mental health and physical health. Yeah, it's overseeing all of
So
that.
their salaries have gone up, and hopefully they're able to recruit from UCSF and all those other wonderful things we'll see in
Yes.
San Quentin.
Yes, but go to Wasco.
Thank you.
That's a huge, right? You don't want to go. It's really difficult for them to recruit mental health practitioners there are 33 prisons in California, and most of them are not San Quentin. Most of them are not LA County. Most of them are not, those are like the two big ones. I can't think of other ones that are close to. Vacaville, thank you.
Right here.
Although Solano is a little harder just in terms of security, but yes, yeah, not everything is close to A community. Yeah.
On your previous slide, it said 43% with mania disorder. Was that 43% of the entire prison population?
That
Or
was
those with
40
mental illness?
That was 43% of all
Touchscreen too.
all state prison inmates experiencing symptoms. So it's 43% of the prison population were experiencing these symptoms in the past 12 months, whereas in the entire US population, only 1.8%
I was
reported
trying to
having
compare it to
experienced.
the pie chart where it said 45% have mental illness and like how that fit into the pie chart.
So the pie chart is specific to California,
Okay.
and this chart is all state prison. It's like, it's a whole, I think we got this from, what is it called? SAMHSA? Yeah. I think that's where this came from. And this is specific to California and based on CDCR data that we received. Yeah. So you can also see that the percentage of the state prison population receiving mental health treatment has been on the rise, which is in one, like, that's good, right? It means that they're receiving treatment, which shows that something is working. But it also, I think, is in part related to the fact that there's just a higher percentage of the mentally ill as we've stripped away a lot of inmates on some of these reforms. So as we've AB 109, which was responsible for taking people out of state prison and having them incarcerated in counties instead. Prop 36, which we sponsored, which removed nonviolent 3 strikes inmates from the prison population. Prop 47, which allowed people to reclassify their offenses from felonies to misdemeanors. There are about 6 different offenses that you could then have reclassified and be released. And it also meant proactively that fewer people that were committing these crimes would be coming to prison for life. So it shortened their stays, it shortened how many people were coming. There's still a core number of people that hasn't been changing to the same degree in prison with mental health issues. There's also a service gap. We talked a little bit just now about the fact that it's hard to recruit mental health professionals to go to Delano, California. Has anybody here been to Delano, California? Yeah, so you can imagine, right? It's you have to drive hours through cornfields to get to Delano. And what is the closest city, like Bakersfield? And that's like an hour and a half away. So it's very hard to get practitioners to some of these far-flung places. Pelican Bay State Prison, way up north, really far away from everything. Ironwood, really far away. There are so many prisons that were specifically placed in communities that are sort of isolated, I think probably in part to provide an economic benefit to the community, but it makes it very difficult not only to recruit practitioners to help individuals with these needs, doctors, etc., but it's also really hard for inmates' families to see them. A lot of inmates' families, particularly those with mental health issues, they're not coming from great wealth. Maybe it's very difficult for them to get a car. If they can't get a car, how are they going to get there? Are they going to get a bus? Does the bus go there? You can arrive at prison for a visit and they'll say, oh, sorry, oops, not today. We're on lockdown. Oh, not today. It's incredibly onerous. For me, as an attorney, it's very hard for me to get to see my clients in some of these places. I can't imagine. I have means. I can't imagine what it would be like to bring a family member to come see someone who's in one of these places. And for those with mental illness, having a connection to family and friends is an incredibly important part of staying connected. So there are degrees of acuity of mental health issues in prison. By far the biggest one, the one that I see the most as a lawyer, is Triple CMS. It's the Correctional Clinical Case Management System. Triple CMS is basically sort of the lowest level of need for mental health intervention. Individuals in Triple CMS will usually have an opportunity to speak with some sort of a psychiatric, psychological counselor. They may have medication that they have access to. They'll have access to special programming. Triple CMS is just kind of at that level. I'd say probably half to 70% of my clients are in the Triple CMS program or have been at some point. Then there's enhanced outpatient or EOP, which is a much higher level of intervention. Individuals in EOP have a very special regimen that they go through. They're really not able to participate in non-mental health related stuff. It's very difficult for them. They've got to be in their group sessions. They've got to have their mental health treatment advisor. It's a much more intensive level of mental health services. And then department mental health is, I think, like a very acute and probably shorter term level of care, of intervention. So those are the basic, that's the basic pie of the types of services available to that 45% that we just looked at in the last pie chart. So anyway, this is kind of what I was just talking about. Lowest level, medication, individual group therapy. This is all triple CMS. This might mean something to those of you doing MPHs. I'm just a lawyer, but schizophrenia, psychotic disorder, bipolar disorder, and major depressive disorder. These are all of the disorders that come within the ambit of the triple CMS designation. Some of which to me seem pretty serious. You might need a little help. Enhanced outpatient program is segregated housing, so you're usually in a group with other individuals who are in the same program as you. This is for acute onset or significant decom, including delusional thinking, hallucinations, medication, individual and group therapy, and at least 10 hours a week of structured therapeutic activities. I do want to talk a little bit about, so CDCR has certainly been working to improve these things. And one thing that they recently did was, before, there are certain credits, they're called milestone credits, that you can get as an inmate that can actually reduce the amount of time that you're serving. And it used to be that if you were in a mental health program, you couldn't get those credits. You were just stuck serving your sentence because you had to be in your group therapy, you had to be doing all these other things. And they recently changed the regulations such that if you are in any of these mental health intervention programs, you will get milestone credits for participating in it. So there's actually an incentive to participate in the kinds of mental health interventions that they think will be helpful to you. And then there's the mental health crisis bed. That's actual inpatient psychiatric care. You'll actually see a lot of individuals who are in triple CMS or EOP go in and out of a crisis bed, depending on whether they have a decompensation event or some other event that necessitates a special close monitoring and special housing. And I'll talk about that. I'll tell you, I'm going to end with just a couple of examples of some clients just so you get a sense of what their experience is in prison. Inpatient treatment, I actually have never had a client that has been in here. As you'll see, anticipated discharges within 30 to 45 days. Oops, sorry. So it's not meant to be a long-term level of care. It is meant only to do a very critical intervention. You'll also see that the acuity has been rising. I talked a little bit about that a minute ago, that there is this core group of individuals that are not benefiting from some of these ameliorative sentencing reforms that are still in prison. You know, despite the fact that a lot of the litigation has been done on their behalf, they're still there, and they are getting sicker. The prison environment is really not conducive to mental well-being. I know in the reports that I sent out beforehand, you'll see in some cases group therapy happens while they're in cages. They're literally in what looks like a telephone booth, but with bars. And they line them up in a circle, and they're expected to participate in some sort of therapeutic intervention in that way. The prison environment, has anyone in here been to a prison? Raise your hand if you have. So every time I go to a prison, I get really mad. Everybody treats you as if you are trying to get over on them. Everybody treats you as if you've done something wrong. Everybody looks at you as if, oh, you're in here to, try to get around the law. I'm obviously being general. There are obviously nice people every place you go, but it's a very oppressive atmosphere. It is very much about you follow the rules, you do the rules. You actually have to walk on a line. If you walk outside the line, you could get a write-up, right? And it just depends on how severe the level of supervision is, right? There's a level 4, level 3, level 2, level 1 institutions, and as you go down levels, you get more freedom. But in some of these places, it is incredibly restrictive. And if you have a mental health issue and you have, and you act out in any way, that can actually make it harder for you to ever come out of prison. And it exacerbates your symptoms. So you'll see that this is what happens. So in addition to the fact that it's very difficult for those with mental health issues to get the kind of interventions they need, they end up spending more time in prison. Just to give you an example, we have a client that has been having mental health interventions since she was 8. She has tried to commit suicide. There's on the record that she has had these really big mental health issues. She's serving, I think it's 30 to life for stealing some stereo equipment from a church. She's been in prison since 1994. Oh, and she's transgender. So her name used to be Henry, now it's Alejandra. And she is victimized in prison. Number one, she's got a mental health issue. Number two, she's transgender. So she's housed in a men's prison and she's expected to room with men. So she's terrified, right? Because she's been subject to multiple episodes of sexual violence while in prison. So what she does is she will be in a meeting with her therapist and she'll spit at the therapist, not on, but at the therapist. She'll get a write-up for it and she calls it paying her rent because that will allow her a single cell. She'll have to go to administrative segregation housing and she'll get her own cell and she'll feel safe. The problem is that every time you get a write-up like that, your classification score goes up. Your classification score goes up, your housing gets more and more restricted. So it's almost like this horrible catch-22 where you're trying to be safe, you're trying to protect yourself, but everything in prison makes it harder for you to do that. And the more you do that, the more time you have to spend in prison. I mean, it's just unbelievable. So again, if you're in an environment where you're expected to walk a straight line and you're having a mental decompensation, they don't make allowances for that. And in fact, this particular client also had many, they're called RVRs, rules violation reports. She had write-ups for attempting suicide. So you can actually have your classification score go up if you attempt suicide. They've recently made some improvements to that. Now you can only get a write-up if you are just pretending to attempt suicide.
I thought you were going to say you're successful.
Right, no, right? Yeah, no, it's just awful. Yeah, it's awful. So now, if you're malingeringly attempting suicide, you get a write-up. But if you make a genuine attempt at suicide, then I think you get a break on your points. But again, you can see that they're really put in a situation that is, it's like a Kafka. I mean, it's just, and they're languishing in here for a long time. So, sorry.
And she's just reaching out for help.
Oh my gosh. Well, you know, and also she's just inappropriately housed. They won't put her anywhere else. She's got a mental health disorder that makes it impossible for her to follow the rules that would allow her some of the ameliorative things that they could do for her in prison. And she's never going to get out.
What isn't she?
I don't remember. She gets
There-
moved a lot.
There's some, I mean, for the first time, because I've been working in San Quentin for a while, there are trans women there. And
Yes.
it's only because the special needs yards were done away with.
Which we, yeah.
Which we'll get to, I
Yeah,
presume,
exactly,
right.
exactly.
And so, yeah.
And that's the thing. There are good things happening for transgender inmates. I mean, needles moving forward. But if you're both transgender and you have an extreme mental disorder, you know, mental health issue, you're not going to get the benefit of some of those better programs. So my poor client is, yeah. I mean, it's interesting. So Proposition 36 is something that our organization wrote and put on the books. It basically said if you're serving a life sentence for a non-serious, non-violent crime, you can go back to the court that sentenced you and you can say, look, I don't need to be here anymore. You should let me out. The crime that I committed in 1996 could no longer give me a life sentence because it's a non-serious, non-violent felony. Judge, can you please let me out? So she went before the judge. She had 3 experts testify on her behalf, explaining, look, she has this history of mental illness. Look, she, you know, isn't violent. The violence that she does is spitting at people so that she can, you know, get a single cell. And the judge, and because of all of her administrative
segregation placement, she hasn't been able to do things like AA or NA. They call it programming in prison. She hasn't been able to do AA, NA. She hasn't been able to do anger management. She hasn't been able to do any of the programs that you do to show that you're rehabilitated, right? And so the judge said, I'm going to deny her. I think she's a danger. It's not why she didn't program. Remember that they said, look, she can't program because she's in ADSEG, because she needs to have single cell housing because she's being violently attacked. And the court said, it's not why she didn't program, it's whether she programmed. And obviously she didn't program, so obviously she's not ready for the community. So obviously she can just stay and wait until she talks to the parole board, which is a whole other thing, because the parole board never lets anybody out. So when you look at the inmate population in California state prisons, those with mental health issues tend to be the lowest risk. The California Static Risk Assessment is this objective tool that CDCR uses to determine what someone's risk of recidivism is. And it's do you have a high risk to recidivate with violence? So 1 is the lowest score you can possibly get, and it means the lowest possible likelihood to recidivate. Then there's 1 for high drug recidivation likelihood. There's 1 for high property, so high theft recidivism rate. Then there's 1 that's high violence for risk of recidivism. And as you can see here, in pretty much every category, right, low risk, moderate risk, high risk drugs, high risk property, high risk violence, those that are designated as mental health disordered inmates tend to have lower risk overall. Yet they tend also to stay in prison longer. And if you look here at actual recidivism rates, they tend to recidivate more. My guess is a lot of that has to do with the fact that they go back to the community. They're not getting the treatment that they need. They're not getting any help. They become a nuisance, and then they get put back in prison because nobody else knows what to do with them. But of course, that's just a guess. I mean, I don't know. Who knows? But what we do know is that it is much, much cheaper to give someone treatment in the community than it is to give them treatment in prison, and that it tends to be more effective. So that's just a whole bunch of stuff about sort of what happens in prison. What we know is that prison is not a great place to get mental health treatment, mostly because the environment is not conducive to actually helping you get better. We know too that it's very difficult to get really good mental health interventions in every prison, that the quality and degree or quantity of mental health care that you're going to get in prison varies greatly from prison to prison. 3, if you have a mental health issue, even if you're getting treatment, you're much more likely to spend longer time in prison because you're much more likely to be a behavior problem. And in that behavioral problem, very little mitigation is given, weight of mitigation is given to the fact that you may have done this as a result of mental illness. And 4, almost everything that we have done to try to get the nonviolent people out who aren't hardened long-term criminals out of prison has not helped those who have mental health issues. So there are a couple really great programs that have done a lot for those with mental health disorders. Mental health courts are one way that we can keep someone from getting into prison in the first place. The client I was talking to you about earlier, the one who snatched the purse and got 100 years to life because he begged the court to give him the maximum. We got him out. And the way we did it is we worked with the district attorney. We said, look, this individual is suffering from a mental health disorder. He shouldn't be in prison. It's terrible. When he was in prison, I mean, I can't even tell you, every other week we'd hear about him having slammed his head against the wall and he was in the hospital, or he tried to commit suicide. I mean, it was consistently a problem, despite the fact that he was on medication and supposedly getting mental health treatment. But then he went to the Santa Clara County Mental Health Court, which is manned by Judge Manley, who is this amazing judge. He's got an eye patch, and he has this court where everybody who comes in, you come in and you get applause. You get applause for coming in. So if you come in and you have a mental health disorder, you have a developmental delay, he makes court a happy place, a good place to come to. You never get kicked out of his program. You can fail, you can do something wrong, you might, get flash incarcerated, you come back. He says, okay, you're here again, you tried, let's go. We worked with Judge Manley to get our client out. Now our client has an apartment, he's living a life, he's reunited with his family, and suffice it to say, he's not banging his head against walls anymore until he's bleeding, and he's not attempting suicide all the time. This is a great case of a win. It also much cheaper than putting someone in prison. It costs a lot less. It's much more humane. And it's a really amazing, sort of beautiful thing to see the district attorney, prosecutor, and public defender working together to solve a problem. Instead of working to put someone in prison or let them free, they're actually working to find out the best way to solve this particular problem. This person needs these services, this person needs this intervention. How do we do it so that we're going to protect public safety, so this person isn't out on the streets, creating problems, acting out, but who also is not going to be confined to a dark, tiny cell where they're taking part in mental health treatment from a cage. How do we do that? So there are several counties that have really robust and good mental health courts. In San Francisco, the now district attorney, soon to be departing, George Gascon, was very interested in some of these issues related to mental health and interventions and how to find alternatives to jail and prison for those with mental health disorders. He, instead of building a new jail, he wants to build a behavioral health justice center with varying degrees of confinement that's meant to do like on the spot, immediate crisis intervention, and then long-term sustainable supervision to varying levels of intensity. I'm not sure what happened to that, but I know that it's something that he wants to go forward. He's in the works, trying to get in the works. There's also legislative potential. We have been working with the legislature to try to get them to find some way to incentivize counties. As a county reduces the number of people they send to state prison, because you get this right, the counties have their budgets and the state has their budget. If you're, say, in Solano County, and what's cheaper for you as a Solano County Superior Judge? Is it cheaper to keep someone in the community or cheaper to send them to the state? If they send them to the state pays all the care, the upkeep, the feeding, the public safety, blah, blah, blah. If you keep them in the county, suddenly your county is bearing the cost of their services. So we're trying to find a way to have the state return the cost or some portion of the cost it would take to keep them in state prison to the county to cover the cost of giving someone with a mental health disorder care through the county and through county services. So we've been working on that for a couple of years. The administration's changed, who knows, but that's kind of something that we're interested in working on. And I do, because it's in my head right now, I do want to talk to you just really briefly about a client that we have with a mental health disorder. This individual was coming up for parole. And this person, before you come up for parole, you get seen by a CDCR psychological risk evaluator. Now, these are psychologists that are hired by CDCR. Okay, CDCR hires them and says, okay, we want you to interview outgoing people who are eligible for parole. We want you to interview them and tell our board of parole if they're a risk of danger to the public. So if CDCR is your boss, what I will tell you is that I have seen, of all of my clients that have gone and had one of these evaluations, I've only seen one of them get a designation of low risk. Every single other one of them that has gone before the board has gotten a high risk evaluation. If you go before the parole board and a psychologist has determined that you're high risk, what is your likelihood, do you think, of the parole board granting you parole? Right. So if you're a mentally ill individual and you act out in prison, you have a classification score that's high. You see things. You think that, you know, someone's hands coming through the feeding place. You think that they're snakes, you know, and it's exacerbated because you're in solitary confinement, because you're mentally ill, because you acted out, blah, 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 blah. What is the likelihood a psychologist finds you low risk? So we have a client that his latest write-up was he was coming out of his cell for a shower and he ran and tried to jump over the tier fence. So basically he was trying to commit suicide. In the process, they stopped him, they put him down, and the guard got injured. So he got an RVR for battery on a guard. That's violence against a guard. He got another, like a year before that, same situation. Another, he got an RVR because there was pot in his cell. I'm pretty sure that he was being taken advantage of by his cellmate, right? So he gets these RVRs. He gets a psychological evaluation where basically the psychologist says, well, you know, he's really violent. Well, his violence is trying to commit suicide and committing battery on a peace officer because he's trying to commit suicide, right? So I just want to read you this board of parole thing here. So the psychologist said he was violent. And this individual is saying, you know, we had a psychologist interview him and he was like, actually, this guy would be a lot better if he were out of prison. He's got a family that's really supportive. His brother is a CDCR guard. He'll make sure that he's going to his appointments. We've got him set up with a mental health intervention in the community. He has a home to go to. Like he would be just fine. So I'm pretty sure that our client thought that he was going to be just fine. But so this is how the first part of this goes. I'm reading this to you because I just read it recently and it makes me so upset. Okay. Why are you suitable for parole? The commissioner asks. Our client says, I'm suitable. I believe I'm suitable for parole because I want to be of service to my community. And I've no longer used any narcotics, drugs, smoke, anything. For the past 20 years, I've had I would say, daily contact with my psychologist and my doctors and stuff like that. And the commissioner says, well, if you've had contact with your psychological doctors, why are you still violent? And he says, well, I was on the wrong meds for a while. This is true. The commissioner says, what's that got to do with being violent? And he says, well, medication. Commissioner says, what's that got to do with being violent? He says, it ate my pancreas up. It was burning. What does your pancreas got to do with being violent? Well, it's a psychological medication. It was, how would you say, what you call valproic acid. And say that again, sir. Valproic acid. Okay. And it's something that, so basically, anyway, they're going to go on. But you can see, I'm sure you can imagine that my client was soon talking about his plans to have a spaceship and, you know, whatever. The commissioner was not interested in anything other than making my client nervous, afraid, attacking him. I mean, that was out the gate. That's what happened. And I think this is just such a perfect example of why those with mental health disorders are just languishing in prison. If they're not going to get out, this is a parole board hearing. He's been in since *94. When is he coming out? Is he going to be able to do better next time when they say, why are you so violent? I don't know. So anyway, that's my spiel. I'm happy to take any questions.